There was something I learned early that most people completely misunderstand about prayer, not because it's hidden, but because they were never shown how it actually works. I remember this clearly. People believed that powerful prayer was about saying the right words, using the right tone, or repeating something long enough. But what I saw was completely different. Now listen carefully. Some people prayed for years, but nothing seemed to change. Same patterns, same struggles, same cycles. And they started to wonder, why isn't this working? Now imagine this. You sit down to pray. You say everything you're supposed to say, but your mind is somewhere else, thinking, drifting, jumping from one thought to another. You finish, but you don't feel different. That's where most people are. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. Prayer is not just about speaking, it's about attention, because whatever has your full attention shapes your direction. I saw this again and again. People who changed their lives did not just pray more, they prayed with focus. Now listen carefully. There is a difference between saying words and being fully present while saying them. One is automatic, the other is intentional. Now imagine this. You're not rushing, you're not distracted, you're not thinking about something else. You are fully there, every word you say. You are aware of it. That changes everything. Now, here's something most people miss. Power in prayer does not come from length, it comes from clarity. Because when your mind is clear, your direction becomes clear. I saw this clearly. People who simplified their approach but increased their focus started seeing real change. Not instantly, but consistently. Now listen carefully. This is not about doing something complicated. It's about removing what's distracting you. Because once distraction is removed, focus naturally increases. Now imagine this. Instead of trying to say more, you say less, but you mean it, you stay with it, you don't rush it. That's where the shift begins. And in this message, AB, I'm going to show you exactly how to do this, why most people never reach this level of focus, and what you can start doing immediately to make your prayer more clear, more consistent, and more effective in your daily life. Now, this is where everything becomes clear, because most people think the problem is spiritual, when in reality, it's mental. I remember this clearly. People were committed. They prayed every day. They used powerful words. They followed what they were taught. But still, they felt no real difference. Now listen carefully. The issue was not that they weren't praying, it was how they were praying. Now imagine this. You begin to pray, but your mind is still thinking about your day. What happened earlier? What might happen next? What you're worried about? Your mouth is speaking, but your attention is divided. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Anything done without full attention loses its impact. I saw this again and again. People believed repetition would make their prayers stronger, but repetition without focus becomes automatic. And what is automatic doesn't create change. Now listen carefully. This is the real problem. Most prayers are split. Part of you is present, but part of you is somewhere else. Now imagine this. You say something meaningful, but you're not fully aware of it. That creates disconnect because your words and your attention are not aligned. Now, here's something very important. Your mind can only fully engage with one thing at a time. So when it's divided, nothing becomes strong. I saw this clearly. People who reduced distraction, even slightly, immediately felt a difference, not because they changed their words, but because they changed their focus. Now listen carefully. This is why some people pray for a long time, but still feel unchanged. Because length does not create depth, focus does. Now imagine this. Instead of saying many things, you stay with one thought. You slow down. You actually think about what you're saying. That creates connection. Now, here's the truth: connection is what makes something feel real. And when something feels real, it starts to affect you. Now, listen carefully. Another mistake most people make is this: they rush, they try to complete their prayer, they move from one line to the next without staying present. Now imagine this: you finish quickly, but nothing stays with you. That's what most people experience. Now here's the truth: if your prayer doesn't stay with you after you finish, it didn't fully connect. I saw this again and again. People who slowed down, even for a short time, experienced more clarity, more calm, more control. Now listen carefully. This is the key understanding. Power is not in doing more, it's in being fully there. Now imagine this: you remove distraction, you slow your pace, you focus your attention. That alone changes everything. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the first shift you need to make, how to prepare your mind before you even begin, so your prayer starts with clarity instead of confusion. Now, this is the part almost nobody talks about, because most people think prayer begins when you speak. But I remember this clearly. The people who experienced the strongest results did something before they said a single word. Now listen carefully. If your mind is scattered before you start, your prayer will be scattered. If your attention is divided before you begin, your words will carry that same division. Now imagine this: you jump straight into prayer right after being distracted, right after thinking about 10 different things, right after rushing through your day. What happens? Your mind doesn't suddenly become calm, it continues in the same state. Now, here's the truth you need to understand: you don't enter prayer and then become focused. You prepare your focus and then enter prayer. I saw this again and again. People who took even a short moment to prepare stayed present longer, not because they tried harder, but because they started differently. Now listen carefully. Preparation is simple, but powerful. Now imagine this: before you say anything, you pause. Not long, just enough to stop the mental movement. That pause creates separation from everything you were just doing. Now here's the first step: you slow down your breathing, not in a complicated way, just enough to settle your mind. I saw this clearly. When the body slows down, the mind follows. Now imagine this: instead of rushing thoughts, you feel a slight calm. That becomes your starting point. Now here's the second step: you clear your intention, not long sentences, just clarity. Why are you praying? What are you focusing on? That awareness directs your attention. Now listen carefully. Without intention, your mind will wander because it has no direction. Now imagine this. You know exactly what you're about to focus on. That keeps your mind from drifting. Now here's the third step: you remove urgency. This is where most people fail. I saw this again and again. They treated prayer like something to complete instead of something to experience. Now imagine this: you are not rushing. You are not trying to finish quickly. You allow the moment to be steady. That changes your entire approach. Now, here's something very important: the way you begin determines how you continue. If you start rushed, you stay rushed. If you start focused, you stay focused. Now, listen carefully. This is the difference. Most people start with distraction and try to fix it during prayer, but the ones who improve start with clarity. Now imagine this: you pause, you breathe, you set intention, you remove urgency, and then you begin. That creates a completely different experience. Now here's the truth: Preparation is not extra, it's essential because it aligns your mind before your words begin. Now, listen carefully. When your mind is aligned, your prayer becomes steady, not forced, not scattered, but clear. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly how to structure your prayer step by step. So once you begin, your attention stays locked in and your focus doesn't drift the way it used to. Now, this is where most people lose it, not because they don't care, but because they don't have a structure to follow. I remember this clearly. People would start strong, focused, intentional, present, but within moments their mind would begin to drift, not because something was wrong, but because nothing was holding their attention in place. Now listen carefully. Your mind needs direction. If you don't give it structure, it will create its own path, and that path leads to distraction. Now imagine this. You begin praying without any clear flow. You jump from one thought to another. You say many things, but nothing connects. That's where focus breaks. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. Clarity in structure creates stability in attention. I saw this again and again. People who followed a simple sequence stayed present longer, not because they tried harder, but because their mind had something to follow. Now listen carefully. This is the structure. One thought, one focus, one direction at a time. Now imagine this. Instead of saying everything at once, you slow down. You stay with one idea. You don't move forward until your mind is fully there. That keeps you aligned. Now, here's the first part of the structure. You begin with acknowledgement, not long, not complicated, just awareness. You recognize what you're doing. That brings your attention into the moment. Now imagine this. Instead of starting automatically, you begin intentionally. That creates connection. Now here's the second part. You stay with one message. This is where most people rush. I saw this clearly. They try to say too much, too quickly, and their attention breaks. Now imagine this. You say one thing, and you stay with it. You think about it. You mean it. That builds depth. Now, here's the third part. You allow pauses. Now, listen carefully. Silence is not a problem, it's a tool. I saw this again and again. People who allowed small pauses stayed more focused because they gave their mind time to catch up. Now, imagine this. You speak, then you pause, you stay aware. That keeps your attention steady. Now, here's the fourth part. You return when your mind drifts, without frustration, without stopping, just control. Now imagine this. Your attention moves away, but instead of getting distracted, you bring it back again and again. That builds strength. Now here's something very important. This is what keeps your prayer powerful, not intensity, but consistency of attention. Now listen carefully. The final part of the structure is this. You close with awareness, not by rushing to finish, but by recognizing the moment. Now imagine this. You don't just end, you stay present until the end. That keeps the connection complete. Now here's the truth. When your structure is clear, your focus stays stable. When your focus stays stable, your prayer becomes real. Now listen carefully. This is the difference. Most people speak, but their mind drifts. You follow structure, and your mind stays. Now imagine this. You apply this every time. Your attention becomes stronger, your clarity becomes deeper, your experience becomes consistent. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what begins to happen when you practice this daily, how your internal state shifts, and why your prayer starts affecting how you think and respond throughout your entire day. Now, this is where things begin to change in a way you can actually notice, not just during prayer, but after it. I remember this clearly. This was the moment people stopped saying, I prayed, and started saying, I feel different. Now listen carefully. Before this stage, prayer feels separate from your life. You do it, then you move on. And within minutes, you're back in the same patterns, same reactions, same distractions, same pressure. Now imagine this. You finish praying, but an hour later, you're overwhelmed again. That's what most people experience. Now here's the truth you need to understand. If your prayer doesn't carry into your day, it won't change your day. I saw this again and again. People believed the act itself was enough, but the real shift happened after. Now listen carefully. When you begin to pray with focus and structure, something stays with you, not the words, but the state. Now imagine this. You finish, and instead of immediately rushing into everything, you feel slightly more calm, more clear, more steady. That's the beginning. Now, here's something very important. That state can either fade or it can be carried forward, and that depends on what you do next. I saw this clearly. People who protected that state experienced real change. Now, listen carefully. This is where awareness becomes essential. Now imagine this. You go into your day and situations start appearing. Normally, you would react instantly, but this time you notice. You pause. That pause comes from the focus you built. Now here's the truth. Your life is shaped more by your reactions than by the situations themselves. And when your reactions change, your outcomes change. Now listen carefully. This is the shift. You are no longer moving automatically. You are responding intentionally. Now imagine this. Something frustrates you, but you don't react immediately. Something distracts you, but you return your attention faster. Something pressures you, but you stay steady. That's the difference. Now here's something powerful. You don't have to force this because it's a continuation of the state you created. I saw this again and again. People who prayed with real focus didn't lose control as quickly during the day because their mind was already aligned. Now listen carefully. This is where consistency begins to build because you're no longer starting from zero every time. You're carrying something forward. Now imagine this. Each day you build a little more clarity, a little more control, a little more stability, and it starts to stack. Now here's the truth. Small improvements repeated daily create permanent change. Now listen carefully. This is why focused prayer matters, not just for the moment, but for everything that follows. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what happens when this becomes consistent, how your reactions begin to change automatically, and why you stop struggling with the same distractions again and again. Now, this is where the difference becomes undeniable because it's no longer just something you feel, it's something you see in how you respond. I remember this clearly. This was the moment people began to notice. I didn't react the way I usually do, and that realization changed everything. Now listen carefully. Up until now, you've been building focus, you've been slowing down, you've been staying present during prayer. And it may have felt simple, even small, but repetition creates change. Now imagine this. A situation appears that would normally trigger you, but this time you pause. Not because you reminded yourself, but because your mind is already trained. That's the shift. Now here's the truth you need to understand. What you practice with awareness becomes your default response. I saw this again and again. People who stayed consistent with focused prayer stopped fighting their reactions because their reactions had already begun to change. Now listen carefully. This is where your patterns begin to rewrite. not through force, but through repetition. Now imagine this: something that used to frustrate you instantly now barely affects you. Something that used to distract you for hours now passes quickly. Something that used to control your mood now no longer has the same impact. That's not random, that's conditioning. Now, here's something very important. This change happens gradually. You won't notice it all at once, but it builds consistently. I saw this clearly. People would suddenly realize I handled that better, and that awareness reinforced the change even more. Now, listen carefully. This is where your decisions improve because you are no longer reacting immediately. You are choosing. Now, imagine this: you think before you speak, you pause before you act, you stay steady instead of rushing. That creates better outcomes. Now, here's the truth: better decisions come from a clear mind, and a clear mind comes from consistent focus. Now, listen carefully. This is the next shift. You are no longer trying to control your reactions. Your reactions are already controlled. Now, imagine this: you move through your day with less effort, less confusion, less mental noise, more clarity, more direction, more stability. That creates momentum. Now, here's the truth: when your reactions change at this level, your entire experience begins to change because you are no longer operating the same way. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the final stage, what it looks like when this becomes part of who you are and you no longer struggle with focus at all. Now, this is the stage most people don't expect because they think focus is always something you have to fight for. I remember this clearly. People would improve, they would gain control, they would stay consistent, but they still felt like they were trying until one day they weren't. Now, listen carefully. There is a point where this stops being something you practice and becomes something you carry naturally. Now imagine this. You enter prayer and your mind settles quickly. You don't struggle the way you used to. You don't chase your thoughts. You don't fight distractions. You are simply present. That's the shift. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Anything repeated with awareness long enough becomes part of your identity. I saw this again and again. People who stayed consistent with this process reached a point where focus became automatic, not forced, not heavy, but natural. Now listen carefully. This is where your internal system stabilizes, not because life becomes perfect, but because your response becomes consistent. Now imagine this: distractions appear, but they don't take control. Pressure shows up, but it doesn't shake you. Unexpected situations happen, but you stay steady. That's the difference. Now, here's something very important. At this stage, you are not correcting yourself after you drift. You are steady from the beginning. I saw this clearly. People who reached this level stopped feeling like they were working on focus because nothing inside them felt chaotic anymore. Now listen carefully. This is where peace becomes your baseline, not something temporary, not something you chase, but something you carry. Now imagine this: you move through your day without constant mental noise. You don't overthink everything. You don't react to every thought. You stay clear. That creates consistency. Now here's the truth. When clarity becomes your default, confusion loses its place. When awareness becomes natural, distraction loses its power. Now listen carefully. This is the final shift. You are no longer trying to make your prayers powerful. Your presence makes them powerful. Now imagine this: what once required effort now happens automatically. That's what makes it permanent. And once you reach this point, you don't easily go back because this is no longer something you practice. It's who you've become. Now, this is where everything becomes clear, because by now you've seen the process, you understand the method, you know exactly what to do. But here's the part most people don't realize: knowing is not the problem. I remember this clearly. People would hear everything you just heard, they would agree, they would feel motivated, and then nothing changed. Now, listen carefully. The difference was never information, it was consistency. Now imagine this. You apply this once, maybe twice, then you forget. You go back to rushing, back to distraction, back to old patterns, and just like that, everything resets. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Small actions only work when they are repeated. I saw this again and again. People didn't fail because the method didn't work. They failed because they didn't stay with it. Now listen carefully. Consistency is not about perfection, it's about returning. Now imagine this. You lose focus one day, but instead of stopping, you come back the next day. You drift during prayer, but instead of giving up, you bring your attention back again and again. That repetition builds strength. Now, here's something very important. Every time you return, you reinforce the habit, not by doing it perfectly, but by doing it consistently. I saw this clearly. People who stayed with it, even imperfectly, reached a level others never did. Now, listen carefully. This is why most people never reach this stage. They expect fast results, but stop before consistency builds. Now, imagine this. You continue for days, then weeks, then months, without overthinking it, without stopping, without waiting for something dramatic. That's when it locks in. Now, here's the truth. Real change is quiet. It doesn't always feel intense, but it becomes permanent. Now, listen carefully. This is the final understanding. You don't need something new, you need to stay with what works. Now, imagine this. Every day, you apply the same focus, you follow the same structure, you return your attention, and slowly it becomes effortless. Now, here's the truth. When something becomes effortless, it becomes part of you. And once it becomes part of you, you don't lose it easily. Now listen carefully. This is what makes your prayer powerful. Not the words, not the length, but your ability to stay present consistently. Now imagine this. You no longer struggle to focus. You no longer rush. You no longer drift the way you used to. You are steady. You are clear. You are present. That's the result. And once you reach this point, you don't go back to the way things were, because you didn't just learn something, you built something. And that's what changes everything.